Toronto sells itself as the most multicultural city on Earth, a skyline built by migrants, a city where accents overlap and no single culture dominates. But walk east along Danforth Avenue, breathe in the smell of freshly roasted coffee, hear Amharic, Tigrinya, and Oromo drifting through the air, and something becomes clear. This doesn't feel like a neighborhood anymore. It feels like a center. Not a loud takeover, not a political one, but a cultural one. Slow, disciplined, and undeniable. Nearly 40,000 Ethiopians and Eritreans now live across Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area. And unlike many diasporas that fade quietly into the background, this one built visible anchors. Churches that gather thousands every Sunday. Coffee shops like Mo for Coffee that remind the city where coffee was born. Restaurants like Rendezvous, founded by Banchi, a woman whose kitchen became a meeting place for diplomats, artists, politicians, and everyday Torontonians alike. Entire parts of Toronto now move to the rhythm of Addis Ababa. From Danforth Avenue to Etobicoke, from North York to Scarborough, Ethiopian life didn't just survive here, it organized, expanded, and quietly reshaped the city around it through faith, food, and relentless work. So how did a community that arrived with almost nothing, refugees, students, families escaping uncertainty, turn Toronto into one of the most important Habesha hubs in the West? How did faith become infrastructure? How did discipline turn into influence? And why does this city, more than most, allow identity to grow instead of shrink? This episode of The Human Map explores how Ethiopians didn't just migrate to Toronto, they rooted themselves into it. If you're new here, subscribe to The Human Map for documentary stories about how people, culture, and everyday life quietly shape the world's great cities. Long before Ethiopian restaurants lined Danforth Avenue, before coffee ceremonies drew politicians and curious locals, before the phrase "Little Ethiopia" ever entered Toronto's vocabulary, the community began in silence. The year was 1972. A small number of Ethiopian students and early immigrants found themselves in a foreign city that barely knew their name. They had no buildings of their own, no established institutions, no clergy. What they did have was faith and each other. Together with Jamaican neighbors, they began praying in borrowed halls, basements, and living rooms. Services were informal, resources were limited, but those early gatherings created something essential, a sense of continuity in a place that felt unfamiliar. For many, faith was not only spiritual, it was survival. Years passed, and the community slowly grew. Political upheaval back home pushed more people outward. Some arrived as students, others as refugees. Most arrived carrying loss, uncertainty, and the need to rebuild life from the beginning. By the mid-1980s, the community had reached a turning point. In 1986, they purchased their first property on Vaughan Road, a physical space that marked permanence. A few years later, as numbers continued to rise, one church was no longer enough. In 1991, Menbere Burhan Kidist Mariam Church was established. This was more than expansion. It was a declaration. For Ethiopian immigrants in Toronto, the church became an anchor, a place where language survived, where children learned who they were, where elders found familiarity in a city that often moved too fast. Inside those walls, hymns echoed that had been sung for centuries. White Nutella wrapped shoulders just as they had back home. The rhythm of Orthodox liturgy connected Toronto to Addis Ababa, Gondar, and beyond. In a Western city where immigrant cultures often soften or fade over time, something unusual happened. Ethiopians did not dilute their identity, they strengthened it. And that identity would become the foundation for everything that followed. Toronto, at the time, was already becoming one of the most multicultural cities on Earth. Immigrants arrived from every direction. But not all communities grew the same way. Ethiopians tended to move collectively. Families sponsored relatives. Friends followed friends. New arrivals were guided toward familiar neighborhoods, churches, and support networks. Gradually, patterns formed. Danforth Avenue began to change. Etobicoke, Dixon Road, and Islington attracted working families. North York became home to students and professionals. Scarborough offered space for elders and growing households. What started as scattered settlement slowly turned into presence. By the time the city began to notice, the foundations were already laid. This is why many Ethiopians speak of Canada with deep affection. Not because life was easy, it wasn't, but because Canada allowed something rare: identity without punishment, visibility without hostility. They were not asked to hide who they were. They were not forced to become invisible. They were allowed to build. And once that permission existed, everything else followed. Faith became structure. Structure became discipline. Discipline became progress. Before there were businesses, before cultural festivals, before public recognition, there was a community that learned how to survive quietly, together. That quiet survival is what made everything else possible. By the time Toronto began noticing the Ethiopian presence, it was already everywhere. Not concentrated in a single block, but spread across neighborhoods, routines, and rhythms of daily life. The community had moved beyond survival and into visibility, not through protest or declaration, but through consistency. One street, however, became symbolic: Danforth Avenue. Locals began calling it Little Ethiopia, not because of an official designation, but because the atmosphere changed the moment you stepped onto it. The pace slowed, the smells shifted, the language around you transformed the sound of the city. Toronto faded into the background. Ethiopia stepped forward. Coffee shops filled with the scent of freshly roasted beans. Inside, Jabena ceremonies unfolded patiently, teaching a culture of time in a city obsessed with speed. Young Canadians tasted Ethiopian coffee for the first time and realized it wasn't just a drink, but a ritual. At Mofor Coffee, a simple declaration on the wall reads that Ethiopia is the birthplace of coffee. It isn't framed as pride, it's framed as fact. Education delivered quietly, cup by cup. A few steps away stands Rendezvous, one of the most recognizable Ethiopian restaurants in the country. Founded by Banshee, it grew from a personal passion into a cultural landmark. For decades, the restaurant has been filled night after night with Ethiopians, Africans, and Torontonians from every background. When the mayor of Toronto once visited and participated in a coffee ceremony, the moment symbolized something larger than a political visit. It marked Ethiopian culture crossing from the margins into the mainstream, not by demand, but by invitation. These spaces are not just businesses, they are meeting points, places where memory is preserved, where identity is shared, and where a city learns to listen. Beyond Danforth, the presence stretches outward. In Etobicoke and the Dixon Road area, Ethiopian families built working-class stability. Long hours, early mornings, late nights. Life structured around responsibility. In North York, students and professionals formed a different rhythm. University schedules, office work, ambition shaped by opportunity. Scarborough became a space of grounding. Elders, families, and affordability converged there, a place where generations overlapped and where cultural continuity felt strongest. Downtown, a younger energy emerged. Nightlife, fashion, music, and social media presence gave Ethiopian identity a modern Toronto accent. Across all these areas, language flowed freely. Amharic blended into English. Tigrinya and Oromo moved effortlessly through conversations. Music played from cars, shops, and living rooms. Toronto did not give Ethiopians a corner. Ethiopians occupied many corners at once. What made this expansion possible was not wealth at the beginning, but endurance. For most newcomers, the first years were exhausting. Degrees went unrecognized. Credentials meant little. Skills had to be proven again. People worked wherever work was available. Cleaning jobs, factories, restaurants, healthcare support, ride-sharing, and logistics. Many balanced 2 or 3 jobs while studying. Nights were short. Progress was slow. Rent was high. Food prices shocked newcomers. Even traditional meals came with Toronto prices. And yet, few left. The belief was simple. If you endure long enough, the system eventually opens. That belief was reinforced by community networks. Churches helped newcomers navigate paperwork. Friends passed along job leads. Families shared housing until independence became possible. Slowly, the climb began. Healthcare became a major sector, especially for women. Nursing, caregiving, and support roles offered stability and upward mobility. Men became highly visible in transportation and logistics, particularly in ride-sharing and delivery networks. Small businesses followed: barbershops, grocery stores, cafes, restaurants. Not all succeeded. Some failed quietly. Others expanded slowly. But the overall direction moved forward. What distinguished the Ethiopian experience in Toronto was not speed, but persistence. They did not disappear into the city. They embedded themselves into it. Canada holds a special place in the Ethiopian imagination. Back home, immigration to Canada is seen as a restart button. Demand is so high that the process becomes competitive, expensive, and heavily discussed. Toronto, in particular, offers something many countries do not. Immigrants are not tolerated here. They are normal. In a city where half the population is foreign-born, visibility does not automatically attract suspicion. Difference does not immediately trigger resistance. This environment allowed Ethiopians to remain visible without being punished for it. They could speak their language openly, wear their cultural clothing proudly, practice faith publicly, build institutions without hiding them. That permission mattered, and it explains why Ethiopian identity in Toronto did not shrink over time. It expanded. By the time the city officially acknowledged the size of the Ethiopian and Eritrean population, the transformation was already complete. The community was no longer new. It was no longer temporary. It was no longer marginal. It had become part of Toronto's structure, not as a loud force, not as a confrontational one, but as a steady presence shaping the city day after day. And this steady presence laid the groundwork for something new. Not just survival, not just stability, but influence. Once a community reaches stability, a new question quietly emerges. What comes next? For Ethiopians in Toronto, that question is no longer theoretical. It is already unfolding across institutions, workplaces, and cultural spaces where influence matters more than visibility. The first generation focused on survival. The second is focused on positioning. Across Toronto, Ethiopian and Eritrean professionals are no longer concentrated only in entry-level work. They are increasingly present in healthcare leadership, technology, finance, education, and creative industries. University graduates move directly into skilled roles. Entrepreneurs think beyond single businesses and toward long-term investment. Real estate groups quietly acquire properties. Creative agencies shape narratives. Nonprofits advocate for housing, youth programs, and immigrant services. Community organizers understand how municipal systems work and how to engage them effectively. This shift marks a transition from workers inside the system to contributors shaping the system. Political engagement reflects the same pattern. Not loud, not confrontational, but deliberate. Community members attend meetings, support candidates, organize voters, and influence local decisions without framing themselves as a political bloc. Many city officials have noticed the same thing. When Ethiopians mobilize, they do it collectively. When they support an initiative, they follow through. When they commit, they stay committed. Influence grows not through slogans, but through reliability. At the center of this transformation is culture. Toronto has embraced Ethiopian and Eritrean culture more deeply than most African immigrant cultures in the West. Not because it demanded attention, but because it offered something appealing. Hospitality rooted in ritual. Communication shaped by restraint. Strong respect for elders and structure. Spiritual grounding that emphasizes order and continuity. In a city that values calm coexistence, this cultural posture resonates. Coffee ceremonies invite conversation rather than rush. Restaurants encourage sharing rather than separation. Community events emphasize order rather than spectacle. This becomes a form of soft power, not aggressive, not performative, but effective. Women continue to play a central role in sustaining this momentum. Beyond households and workplaces, they are the connectors between generations. They organize community finance systems, mentor younger women, and quietly back new businesses. Their influence rarely appears in headlines, but it shapes outcomes. At the same time, youth are redefining what Habesha identity looks like in Canada. Music, fashion, sports, digital media, and entrepreneurship blend Ethiopian heritage with Toronto's global culture. They are not choosing between identities, they are layering them. For many, Toronto is not just a place of residence, it is a platform. Urban researchers suggest that if current migration patterns continue, the Ethiopian and Eritrean population in Toronto could grow significantly in the coming years. International students, family sponsorships, and professional pathways continue to feed the city's Habesha ecosystem. What was once a support network becomes an engine. A community that arrived scattered and uncertain now operates with internal systems strong enough to sustain growth across generations. This is no longer a temporary chapter. It is a long-term imprint. Toronto often calls itself a mosaic. Many cultures contribute color, texture, and shape, but only some become structural. Ethiopian life in Toronto has moved beyond presence. It has become part of the city's framework. From faith to food, from work ethic to cultural rhythm, from neighborhoods to institutions, the influence is no longer emerging. It is established. Toronto may be thousands of kilometers from Addis Ababa, but for tens of thousands, it is no longer foreign ground. It is a second center of life, memory, and ambition. A place where displacement turned into direction. This is the Human Map, where we document diaspora communities, cultural identities, forgotten places, and everyday lives that quietly shape the world around us. If you found this story meaningful, subscribe to the Human Map for more in-depth documentaries. And let us know in the comments, do you think Toronto is becoming one of the most important centers of Habesha life in the West? We'll see you in the next story.